what is accreditation? In the allied health field, some programs are accredited. This means that the educational program has met a set of standards and requirements by an accrediting body. ABHES and KHAP are the accrediting bodies that are referenced when speaking of accreditation in the medical assistant education field. Now, there are two types of accreditation, and we talked about that in the slide before in regards to pathways to certification. The two types are institutional accreditation and programmatic. And it's also important to note that the NHA exams are also accredited exams. So go ahead, Laura, if you want to
this is where I know we get a lot of questions, even from our legacy clients, our educational clients. There's a lot of layers or types of accreditation. So we wanted to break that down a little bit, what it means and what it is. So when we talk about an institution being accredited, so this is just some snapshots of where we are now. Historically, there were actually several types of institutional accreditation, but in 2020, the federal government actually removed that. And so there is just a universal label of institutional accreditation. However, there are several different kinds of accrediting bodies that an institution could use. And those different types of accrediting bodies may have more or less different kinds of layers or expectations of what they mean. This shift, basically the idea from one school to the next, this is post-secondary ed specifically, is to allow for the transfer or articulation agreements is what that's called, of credits from one school to the next. You go to a community college and you complete a certain amount of credits, you want that to be able to transfer to your bachelor's degree at the next school. So that's an articulation agreement. So now with the single label of an institutional accreditation, those credits can transfer much more smoothly rather than having kind of different types of labels. The goal for an academic institution to be accredited is so that their candidates, their students, can obtain federal financial aid. Financial aid is not easily or much available if the institution isn't accredited, and that's a federal regulation. So we're talking about institutional accreditation. Then we talk about the fact that NHA's exams are accredited. This is a completely different accreditation process. An institution can be accredited. Our exam itself is also accredited. And this is where we have a lot of confusion also, the ICE and the NCCA. What does that mean? What are they? How does it work? What is this relationship? Why do I keep saying all of these random letters in sequence? ICE and the NCCA. Okay, well, the ICE is the membership association that sets the standards, right, that establishes those expectations. So some of other certification companies don't provide accredited exams, but they'll pay the membership fee to the ICE. So on their websites, it'll say proud member of the ICE. Well, we know that that means that they're paying to be able to say that. They are not meeting those standards to have an accredited exam. They're just a member of this body that establishes those pieces and provides information out around the industries. The relationship between this and the NCCA is that is the accreditation that is met. So the ICE establishes those pieces, and the NCCA is the type of accreditation that is provided. So they're related, they work together. This is kind of all the blitz and blobs about it, but NHA meets and is accredited by the ICE. We have an NCCA accreditation for our exams. So just to make sure that relationship makes sense. Then we talk about the actual programmatic accreditation, and I'll toss this back over to you, Christiana, since you're the expert. Does that sound all right?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you for such a great job explaining how the institutional accreditation works.
Sure.
So as Laura said, there's institutional accreditation. And as I mentioned earlier, we also have programmatic accreditation. A medical assisting program can become accredited by KHAP or ABHES, even if it is not a part of an institution that is accredited. That being said, an institution that is accredited that has a medical assisting program does not mean that those students of that program automatically get to sit for a AAMA certification exam. The actual program is considered what must be accredited when we're talking about accreditation as a pathway to certification. CAHAP is the Commission on Accreditation of Allied Health Education Programs. CAHAP sets standards and guidelines for programmatic accreditation. When you click on that link, it brings up these standards and guidelines. My background is in accreditations and standards, as well as in proficiency, accuracy, and assessments and mapping. What this means is an institution might hire a consultant to have their program become CAHAP accredited, and that consultant would then sit with the institution and go through every single step. Now, CAHAP standards and guidelines include educational standards required for a medical assistant to know and competencies. These standards from CAHAP is what the AAMA uses to determine their test plan outline, and what the rest of the certifying bodies use as guidance. It's really great because the NHA is now considered a sponsoring organization of CAHAP. If you click on that link, it will take you to an article on NHA Now about the MAERB and when we became accredited. So you can click on that. And that was back in June of 2018 that was written by Jessica Langley. So that gives some information there. This kind of goes right in hand with the MAERB. When you are talking about the educational standards, what do students need to know? Why do they need to know this? Who decides what is going to be covered? Medical Assisting Education Review Board is a committee on accreditation with CAHAP. They are comprised of members from all over the United States, practitioners, educators who have worked in the field, that have their hand on the pulse of what is happening in the field of medical assisting, in the field of education and medical assisting. And prior to 2018, the AAMA certification agency was the only sponsoring organization for the MAERB. Now, they have 3 sponsoring organizations, which offers several mutual benefits. Now, this little blurb in quotation marks is taken right from the MAERB website, and you can go there and take a look. But when we have clients that might be questioning the validity of our certification exam, how we compare to others, I'm telling you that when we create products, when we are updating products, we are strictly following guidelines established by ABHES and CAHAP to make sure our students across the United States are learning the concepts and competencies that they need to know to become professional medical assistants. Not only are we doing that internally, now, if you open up the standards and guidelines link to CAHAP and you bring up the 2022 Medical Assisting Standards and Guidelines, this is the very first page on that document. You will see it started in 1969 with standards and guidelines, and then it was revised all throughout these years. You'll see heavy revision since the 2000s, right, in 2003. This area where 2003, 2008, 2015, 2022, this is when content strategists, subject matter experts like myself, we have to be on top of this information, understanding what has changed in the standards, why it has changed, and how it impacts the students' learning. There is confidence that can be conveyed to the customers that, yes, our products take into consideration ABHES and CAHAP educational and competency standards. And we endorse the standards and guidelines set forth by the Medical Assisting Education Review Board. And I think that's a pretty neat visual to show how far the NHA has come and our position within the market. ABHES is the Accrediting Bureau of Health Education Schools. Similar to CAHAP, ABHES provides institutional and programmatic accreditation for allied health programs. They operate quite similarly to CAHAP in terms of how they offer programmatic standards. I was a site evaluator for ABHES, so I would go to places in the United States with my checklist and sit down and evaluate a school's eligibility for programmatic accreditation. MA accreditational standards with ABHES are a little less detailed than what you will find with CAHAP. They are broader in definition, and sometimes it's considered the easier accreditation to obtain just because there are less standards. And when you take a look at the standards and guidelines for each of those accrediting bodies, you can just see the visual difference in what is being offered and required by each of those.
We've talked a lot about accreditation, about programmatic accreditation. First and foremost, we don't require that.
Correct.
Right? That is not something that we require. It's a value to programs, so on and so forth. Also, most of this does not apply to career and technical education.
Because they're the state recognized academics.
Exactly.
That
So
program.
accreditation
Correct.
for a secondary program looks completely different. And you're not going to talk about, you may talk about standards, but you're probably not going to talk about KHEP and MAHERP a lot.
Exactly.
There are different certification exams and more than just these 4 that we mention here, but these are the most common, the most recognized, I would say, in the United States. When I was an instructor, I would explain to my students that going to an accredited program is the difference between, I myself can start my own medical assisting program and operate out of an office in a building and teach whatever I want and say, this is a medical assisting program. You will pay me for this information and I will give you a certificate stating that you are a medical assistant. But the accreditation standard is what sets it apart. Christie's medical assistant shack down on, Route 5 versus, an educational facility that has met certain standards and regulations. So following those accreditation competencies in education, like Laura said, a hamburger is a hamburger. It's just how you make it might be a little bit different.
It's kind of like a champagne fountain, right? Where you've got the broader base. So if an institution itself is accredited, that means that this school as a whole, as an entity, has to meet certain expectations by the accrediting body. It's usually the amount of graduates that they have and certain expectations for setting goals and standards and the amount of time in the classroom. And their institution as a whole is accredited, which allows for, again, transferability of credits and a certain recognition from one school to the next. Programmatic accreditation is like getting a specialized piece on top of it. So not only is my school accredited, so no, you could be in the science program or the math program or here for just the football, but whatever it is, your program you're going through is from an accredited institution. But if your program becomes accredited by KHEP or ABHES for medical assisting specifically, for example, then that means that program had an additional layer of review, evaluation, and confirmation for just that one program. I could be in the biosciences field at school X, and the school is accredited, but I'm not accredited by KHEP because I'm in biosciences. The medical assisting program, the graduates from that have been evaluated to have met that specific standard of expectation in educational learning. So it takes it to a deeper level of evaluation. It's also difficult. It's expensive for the school. And they have to do all kinds of things throughout the year to maintain. They have to have a board of that evaluates their program. You have to have certain graduation expectations and enrollment pieces. There's all kinds of checks and balances to maintain that accreditation once you have it. And it's really difficult and frustrating for the school. So whenever you have an institution who's going through their accreditation review, whether that be at the institution level or at the programmatic level, it is the most stressful time for the educators. They are doing everything to buff and polish and sharpen before the Christianas come through and evaluate them to say if they can keep their accreditation or not. That evaluation establishes how long your accreditation is renewed for. Just depends on the accrediting body and how well they adhered to the expectations upon their review. So it's a lot of red tape. It's very frustrating and difficult. Christiane, anything to add?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. One thing with institutional accreditation, it's very business. It's the business unit of education. It's finances, staff, how the business is run, how the school is run as a business. For instance, an institutional accreditation standard might be all of your faculty and staff must have 10 hours of professional development every year. That would be an institutional accreditation standard. Whereas a programmatic medical assisting accreditation standard is going to say, okay, your student must demonstrate competency in phlebotomy. At that point, I'm going to come into that school and I'm going to say, I want to see your competency checklists for these students. We ask for physical documents or how it's stored in their in their electronic digital library or record keeping system. So you have accreditation specialists coming in and asking for specific proof that their students have acquired and obtained mastery in competencies. A lot of times the academic accredited programs are going to be those that are offering those longer training programs.
Also about the expectations of the school, right? You know, if it's if it's an accredited school that's going to have to meet certain standards, they'll also have financial aid potentially available for their candidates, which helps with funding for them. Chrissy, did you want to clarify further?
Well, and I was going to say also with why it's important for a sales rep to know if the school is accredited as a whole is because we're touching on a lot of the requirements that they have. And one of those requirements is placement rates. That comes into play with us, right? Because we're trying to help those students get jobs. If they don't meet a certain amount of placement rates, they could lose their accreditation for that program. And so that's a huge thing where we can get in and really talk with them about what's making your students marketable for employers to hire them in the fields that they graduated in. So I just wanted to mention that piece.
I'll tell you why employers would understand and be aware of this is because they sit on the accreditation boards. They sit on the advisory boards. They have a pulse on the community and they know what those are. However, as there has been such great knowledge about medical assisting as a profession throughout the years, there is an understanding amongst employers and amongst the entire entity of those who are interested in this profession that understands kind of what we were talking about. You know, a hamburger is a hamburger with the correct ingredients. A certification, particularly those who have gone through an accredited exam, a certification exam with set credentials represents a distinct standard has been met, right? And I know we keep saying the word standard, but that is exactly what the field of medical assisting is about. Accreditation standards, competency standards, education standards, just across the board. I do think that the employer might be aware of accreditation standards and things of that sort, but I think their purpose and their focus is the importance of getting trained, certified, credentialed medical assistants. Not only does it show that they've met a certain level of competency, it shows that they have professionalism and pride by going out and obtaining a certification in a field where it isn't mandatory. And it also helps with liability. Liability insurance, if you have certified professionals on staff, a lot of times it's going to help you in the long run, and they pose less of a risk for those employers because they understand the profession.
Standards of safety and care, which is what the employers are being evaluated by.